watching A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, I had one of those moments. You know the ones. You're happily watching when suddenly your brain says, I'm gonna have to make that. And this time it was Ser Duncan's shield, because when a knight turns up carrying a shield with a great big tree painted on it, well, that's not something I can simply ignore. Luckily, I remembered a recent build where I'd made a Lord of the Rings inspired stained glass window, and tucked away in the leftovers from that project were two very promising pieces. A shield shaped piece of cardboard for the backing and a thick sheet of foam for the top. It was almost as if past me had quietly planned this moment, although, knowing me, I had simply hoarded the scraps and hoped they might be useful one day. All I needed to do was trim a little from the top to get better proportions and glue the two pieces together. Admittedly, it's not quite the size of a proper knight's shield, but unless a Hedge Knight happens to wander into my craft room, I think I'll be safe. Once the glue had dried and everything was firmly attached, I could start adding the wood details. Using a craft knife, I deeply scored lines to create the wooden planks, making sure they were slightly uneven widths. I also kept in mind that the shield would eventually have a metal band wrapped around the edges. Next, I widened the gaps between the planks with a ballpoint pen, brushed the surface with a steel brush for texture and added wood grain using the knife. The plank edges still needed a little more definition, so I used a pointy tool to deepen them. It also turned out to be the perfect tool for adding a few bits of battle damage, because let's face it, a knight shield that looks brand new is clearly not being used properly. For painting, I work directly onto the foam, so all that lovely carved detail will stay visible. Dunk's shield is repainted in a large green elm tree against a glowing sunset sky, with a shooting star overhead. The sigil tells of the story of his journey, and the star marking his first night travelling with Egg. I started by blocking in the main colours with acrylic paints, then slowly layered details over the top. At this stage the foam marks very easily, so drawing the tree first wasn't really an option. Instead, I did what every sensible crafter eventually does. I winged it. Using sponges and a fan brush helped build up the texture of the sky and leaves. The metal trim around the edge is made from a thinner sheet of foam, cut to shape, gently bent around the shield and glued in place with contact adhesive. To give it a hammered metal look, I tap the surface with a hammer and a small rock. These were painted with silver acrylic, and while the paint was still wet, I dabbed it with scrunched up tissue paper to create a worn metal texture. I also cut bracket shapes for the 3 corners, just like the original shield design. Then, while rummaging through my craft stash, I discovered some metal fabric studs. I think I've had these since my daughter Willow was in primary school, which only proves my long-standing craft rule: never throw anything away. Eventually, the perfect project will appear. the shield, I gently bent it into shape, weighed it down, opened a window, put on my mask and gloves, and coated everything with UV resin to give it a hard, durable finish. The resin looked a little too shiny though, so I dulled it down with some frosted glass spray, a trick I've used on other projects. And the final touch was polishing the metal trim with a homemade version of rub and buff made from shoe polish and metallic mica powder. And I have to say, I am absolutely thrilled with how it turned out. A rather fine addition to my craft room wall and proof that even a humble hedge knight can inspire a little creativity. Now I'm curious, if you made your own shield, what would your sigil be? Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time in the Shire Meadow studio. Bye bye.